we have an artist who's one of the great sculptors living today, internationally acclaimed, but who, like so many of my guests, is an adventurer, a maverick, someone who is prepared to say yes as his first word rather than no, which is why I've got him here tonight, because he said yes when I phoned him, and I'm delighted he is. He is, well, we'll find out all about his work, but he is Richard Wilson, and I'm delighted to have him here. Now, what have you got?
Well, I'm just promoting my Darlings exhibition at
what sort of show do you think this is?
Miyaku Narita, go and see it.
It is actually a stonking good show in that little gallery in Spitalfields called 11 Spitalfields. But if you think we're going to plug a tawdry little stunt like that on this show, you've got another thing coming. We first got to know each other through the sort of world of performance art and noise making, didn't we? When the Beau Gamelan, which was 1982 semi-cooperative, it was a loose confederation of like-minded souls, wasn't it? Dedicated to one thing, making the most god-awful racket.
Yeah, it's kind of linked in with a lot of artists at that time were investigating sound making, and we responded to a London Musicians Collective request for new musics. And you can either conform and verify common knowledge, or you can go and attack against it and say, well, we'll go in the crack and find a new way of finding ways of making sound. Yeah. And the late Paul Burwell, myself and Anne Bean formed the Beau Gamelan for a one-night only event, and, you know, gave up in 1991, having gone all over the world.
Yeah. And you were very much a live performance act when you, I use the word act as a showbiz word, but you were coming together of 3 or 4 artists who just made live work. You didn't record it, you didn't document it in any specific sort of reproducible way. You were there and you were...
I mean, we became obsolete because the Arts Council wouldn't tour a happening. Yeah. We were really, you know, the sort of end result of the happening. We went out and made live work. Every show was different, starting in 1980, very early 83, finishing in 91. And as I say, went all over the world. We built our own instruments, went to scrapyards, built our own stuff, and we responded to any site and responded to any situation that was imposed upon us, outdoor, indoor. And really looked at, with the Beau Gamelan, looked at first principles of sound making. There's only 5 ways of making a sound. You know, you can hit, whirl, strum, pluck, or
pinch.
Is that, yeah, there is another one, rub, or blow. But the other 2 areas that we got involved with were pyrotechnical sound, fast oscillation of burning chemicals. So we worked a lot with explosions, rattles, bangs, whistles, and that kind of area. And the other one, which is enveloped in the 5, is we got involved in steam. So we worked a lot with ship's whistles and that kind of thing. But we kind of got finished by what was happening in Ireland, actually, with the result of new legislation about moving certain chemicals around the country, etc. So, you know, we couldn't move our pyrotechnics around. And steam boilers, the legislations on those all went up, so we had to cancel all of that. So we can't now, and in fact, we did little experiments with light bulbs in water, hitting them with gas burners, etc. Yeah. You can't do that kind of thing now. Health and safety has killed us.
No. I love the idea. We'll come on to health and safety issues about a show that we did more recently at the Tate Gallery, but that'll come at the end of our story. While you were making this live art, were you also making more permanent structures? Were you a sculptor at that point?
Yeah, I started as a sculptor. I mean, I finished Hornsey College of Art in '73. I did a postgraduate at Reading University, came back, moved into Butler's Wharf, you know, 76 to 81. I had 3,000 square feet of studio space, which encouraged me to really push my sculpture forward. £60 a quarter of a year rent. You must have gone to those and been parties in Time Out, you know, with the rollers coming in, you know, every Saturday.
£60 cost you a good.
And there were a lot of very amazing artists there. So it was a kind of a nexus of really interesting people doing stuff. I mean, you had Derek Jarman, you had the Logan Brothers, you know, you had Malcolm Pointer. There were lots of people doing stuff. Anne Bean with all her parties. Yeah. And, you know, it was south of the river. You know, the south hadn't been developed in any way like St Catherine's Dock and the whole thing. And so, you know, it was a hub of, you know, about approximately an organic meeting of 200 artists. Biggest collection of artists in Europe at that time, up until 81. Then the fires happened, you know, the sort of Jewish lightning, while the Green Goddesses were out, when the fire brigade were on strike, and the whole lot got burnt down. So we were all then dispersed. And at that point, you know, Anne, Paul and I stayed together, and the Bow Gammon was formed out of that. Yeah. But it was a very schizophrenic existence, because I was working as a sculptor and also getting involved in sound making.
Yeah. And at that time, were you showing at a gallery, or were you, before that sort of stage, were you just making work and hoping that one day you'd get it seen somewhere?
No, I was at that stage, from 76 right the way through to when Butler's Wall finished, I was showing in galleries, but what it was all self-promotion by way of a collective putting together shows. So you might get like 3 or 4 people coming together and saying, do you fancy being part of this show? The theme is this or that. And we would then go out and find space that we could occupy, or that they would give us as a venue. Yeah. So, I mean, in fact, that map hasn't really changed over many, many years. I mean, there is a bit of a thing now, like, you know, this is what the new kids are doing. In fact, it's been going on for many, many, you know, 30, 40 years. And we managed to sort of keep, or I was managing to keep going with like the late Darrell Viner and people who were producing work. You know, he was ex-Slade, I was ex-Reading, and so we came out and we were putting shows together. And, you know, it got to the point where recognition started to come through magazine, and from that you then had an invitation that was more highbrow, and you started to set, you know, the level higher. So, you know, Aperto in Venice, 1985.
It's very interesting you say that your earliest work was shown and installed and exhibited in buildings that you found, site-specific work and so on. And in a way, that's been a constant theme, hasn't it, through what you've done? Your work is very much about your interaction with the architecture, with the space, with the sound of a place, with the materials of a place, and the materiality of a structure. Your work is not something typically that can be just as happily shown in someone's living room as it could be shown in a museum or in a private collection. You're given a space, and that's where your process begins, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what it is, it's not that I don't feel comfortable within the sterile environment of the gallery, it's more that I don't feel as if I'm an object builder. And therefore the gallery hasn't encouraged me to come to them. So I've had to search another route. And in searching another route, I've gone probably outside the gallery. That's not a rejection, it's just that I've gone outside the gallery and I've got involved in, you know, public art, working in spaces that aren't necessarily recognizable as, you know, the white cube, the white space. And so one finds oneself starting to react to spaces, and in doing so, I started to enlist the space as part of the work. And so it became very site-specific. So you become labelled as such, and therefore the phone rings for people looking for site-specific work. And in doing so, you then find yourself going down a route that was never intended, but you become quite competent at, and no one else is down that route, so you become flavour of the month, you know.
And it must be said that the single piece of work that brought you to a huge audience that was probably a surprise to you, and a very welcome one, was 2050 that you did at Matt's Gallery. Now, for those who don't...
Very old work.
A very old work, but a truly great work. And for those who don't know, what I've got here is a little bit of film of the piece.
It's made.
How many
It's been made
examples
nine times now around the world. The latest incarnation at the Statue Gallery in Chelsea, free to go in. Unfortunately, you're not allowed into the corridor. There is a reason for that. I had a very strong argument with Charles about that. They have 5 coachloads of kids every day, and he said it'll be a complete mess. He has been sued twice, so... pre this one in northern Iraq 2 years ago.
You built it.
It was the last time I travelled out to orchestrate the work.
The nature of the piece, it's obvious to say, is that it's like putting a mirror into a room, and it takes on a lot of the characteristics of the room. For anyone who doesn't know the materiality of it, it is effectively a room that is half full of black sump oil, into which there's a promontory where the spectator can walk. It feels as if you're up to your chest in oil, and the smell, it's so noxious, it's so heavy, it hangs in the air, and it's a very heady experience. Tell us a little bit about the process of making a work like that. It's not something you can try out with a little... I think I'll fill the bath with oil and then see what that does, and then make it bigger.
As a sculptor, there are trigger points, and simply a trigger point was the TARDIS in Doctor Who. Like, how can I make a space bigger than we see it to be? And this all relates back to a fundamental that I work with, which is, like to challenge our preconceptions of the world. I want to try and show that things can be very different. So if I can take a room and do something to it, an architectural space, and do something to it, that we have to go, what? And have a look again, that's the success of the work. Yeah. So in this scenario, what you're doing is you're looking at a room, but it's doubled, it's reflected, it's a kind of a Darren Brown trick of the imagination in one sense. It's a sleight of hand, but at the same time, it's using all sorts of things which are kind of contravening the vocabulary of sculpture. I mean, there's a grammar of material that sculptors work with. So to take a waste hazard material, like I have done, most sculptors won't go into that territory, whereas I said, well, I'm going to take something that we know is hazardous waste material. I'm going to make you think about it in terms of beauty. Yeah. And so the thing evolved out of that. It was about the TARDIS, about doubling the space, the interior space, making it bigger than the room that you'd imagined, and doing it with something that was, a teaspoon down the drain, you'd be arrested, or if it was on your dress or trousers, it'd be a catastrophe. Doing it with something where you had to reconsider, your thoughts on that material. And it was through happy accident, really. I mean, I didn't know what the end result would be. I took a chance on it. I made many maquettes, and then I went off to local. This was first done in 1987 in Matt's Gallery, and I went off to a load of taxi firms and just drained them of all their surplus oil. And the heavy ends were still in the oil. We had the halogens, we had the acetones, we had the Ds, and we had the petrol. So it was quite heady for my my audience. Now the oil is all refined, it's all bought in, it's boiled to its flash point. All that, what they call the heavy ends, the halogens, are taken out, carcinogens are taken out, and you now go into a room which just in the summer will have a slight smell. Yeah. And you get this
where's the fun in that? Where's the fun in that if it doesn't make you physically ill? Another piece that you did soon after that, I think, was it at the Matt's Gallery's water table?
Yes, that was my parting with Matt's Gallery, and that was the new space we're jumping now to 1994, and I was to launch the new gallery, and I wanted to build a piece of work that existed outside the rented space. So the idea there was that I could either be outside the window or above the ceiling or down in the ground. And the original idea came from in a kind of like side tangent to the oil, which was a reflection. The idea was to put a cricket pavilion, funny enough, right. Richard, into the ground, upside down, dig the floor up, and put this, so you stand at the base of the building and you look down to the ceiling, which is an absurd thing to be doing. In doing so, we hit liquid sand, which meant I'd hit London's water table. And London does have a level of water that sits, and it's draining very slowly now, because centuries ago we had pipes that went down. There were 300 boreholes in London that fed factories for steam.
If I could just interject here, Richard is the only artist I know who, on hitting the water table and not intending to, would punch the air and say, yes!
Well, it's one of those wonderful things where, you know, you hit a major problem, which is like, I'm destabilising the building. You know, these columns that are holding the gallery up will slip if I go any further. So I brought some pals in, Price & Myers structural engineers, and they looked at it and said, yes, you've hit liquid sand. You can throw lots of money at it and cough a dam and pump it out, or, you know, you've got a problem. And I thought, okay, the problem becomes the work. Yeah. So at that point, in 19 days left to put the show together, having planned for months to put a, you know, upside down house into the floor, I had to reconfigure, and the end result of that was to take a full-sized billiard table, and the building was a billiard table fabricator, a full-sized billiard table that acquired a seventh pocket, which made nonsense of the game, but the seventh pocket happened to be a 28-inch Hepworth sewer pipe that went down 5 metres into the ground and hit London's water table. And down there was a set of paddles that every now and again went bloop, bloop. And it's rather like that lovely cushion shot. You'd go there and you'd look over and you'd get that bloop. So that was water table.
Going through, and I don't want it to be too sketchy, because, I mean, this work is all amazing, but going through Richard Wilson's greatest hits is such a joy, because not only is the work so beautiful and compelling and mesmerising and original, but there always seems to be so much fun involved for you as well. Security. You were asked to close down the Serpentine, weren't you, in its first incarnation, to do the last show there before it had a major refit and renovations.
Jamming Gears.
Gears.
Yeah. I went to a meeting with Julia Peyton-Jones, Jonathan Watkins and myself and a few other of their heavies. And they said, we've got to close, well, not got to, we've got lottery money, 3 million I think it was, and we want to dig out our basement, put an education space in, and we want a Maverick to do something. And I said, no, I'll do your first show when it's all done. And there was this pregnant silence. And after 5 minutes I said, only joking, yeah, what do you want me to do? Because I'm not the mad axeman. I'm actually a very sensitive choreographer of work. And, you know, in terms of what I make, having a very good sense of my world and how it stands up, you know, structure and form and, you know, dynamic and velocity, I kind of have a very good sense of that. You know, you can tell that when you watch someone parking, actually. You can see when someone's got a very good sense of their body in their world. And I knew that I could do something with it. We were banking on some sponsorship, and the original idea for the Serpentine Gallery was to bring in a core drilling company. Now, core drillers, what they do is they have a device which is basically a drill, and they will drill any hole into any material at any size. And the idea was like a jigsaw puzzle. You do 100 holes and you swap all those things over. You take a great big core of the floor and you put it in the wall, you put the wall in the ceiling into the toilet into the bookshop, and the whole thing would be swapped round. Unfortunately, our sponsorship sort of fell apart at the very end, so we only managed to get a certain amount. But we succeeded and we put that show together, coupled with a drawing show based around the Serpentine show at the oh God, what's that gallery in Davis Street? I've forgotten its name. So we did a drawing show and a sculpture show in 19 days. Yeah.
Right.
I like pressure.
Clearly.
I respond to pressure.
So, yeah, I mean, if we can whiz forward a bit further to the Millennium Dome. You were commissioned to make a piece of work for that. I'll find a photo.
25 artists from around Great Britain invited to go and look at the Millennium Space, the North Meadow Sculpture Park, and of 25, of all the artists invited, 25 shortlisted and 9 then commissioned. But myself and Anthony Gormley chose not to work within the Millennium Dome site, but off-site on the riverfront. And Anthony produced Quantum Cloud, a figure caught within a dynamic structure of lines. And I, working with architecture, which I've always done, predominantly always done, bought a 240-foot ship and took a slice out of it with the idea that if you can slice a district, which is the GMT line, you can put a slice on that GMT line to announce it. There's that lovely, wonderful piece of brass up on the pathway up to the observatory that people stand either side of the GMT line, like they do at Tower Bridge. You know, there's that lovely gap that they stand on. And I thought, well, we'll just, you know, do that. And also, you know, of course, there's this blaze of history to the naval institution, but there's nothing to doff the cap to the merchant seaman. So I thought we'd bring the ship in. But this was a big change in my sculptural career because it also started to include, you know, not formal aspects, but more context. So I started to think about, you know, like, why is the river dead? You know, what happened to our Commonwealth and the fact that ships went out and came back 1,000 a week, and there were seats all around that particular part of the Millennium site where people could watch when King George was crowned. You know, and I kind of thought, okay, the context is that, you know, our shipping industry is dead. Let's make something that would weep itself back into the river. This will rust away. In actual fact, through default, the piece is still there. And I have an in perpetuity license, and as you can see, and Richard has enjoyed many parties.
It does bring a whole new meaning to the word gin palace, it must be said.
I think it's the only sculpture that one occupies as an office and has a good time in, you know.
We went down there when the Stones were playing at the O2 a couple of years ago. We went down there. Richard very generously invited us down to listen to the Stones from here, because it's literally on the O2's doorstep. And we were playing records in anticipation of listening to Sir Mick. And we thought it must have started by now. And subsequent to him moving in there and all the kerfuffle going on when the place is built, they've soundproofed it so perfectly now that not a single note can escape from the dome.
So we played our own.
We were playing records, and you know, we fantasised that Mick Jagger might come and ask us to turn it down because I'm trying to do a show, you know. But mercifully, he didn't. I mean, it is a wonderful piece. How did you actually physically get that there? I mean, doesn't look particularly seaworthy, does it?
Throw the floor open to Brian, who is the chief engineer who was responsible for us finding the ship up,
did you bring
up
it
at
as a
Teesside.
slice, or did you bring it as...
We had to get a crane barge over from Holland. We lifted the 104-ton section that we'd cut from the ship on the River Tees, and then brought it down the North Sea with its own complications. You know, we hit a storm at Harwich and had to go in for 2 days, and then the till really started to ring. And then we finally got it down and piled into the river. And after that year, that's when I acquired the in perpetuity license. Yeah. But it's still there. We open 1 weekend a year to the public, which is the London Open House, and people come aboard and say, God, it'd be lovely to live here. Yeah. I mean, I talk about it as a simple exercise. It's a bit like taking a slice of bread out of the loaf. You know, I mean, how do you do something like this? Well, you just cut it, you take it out, you stiffen it, you put it on a barge, you bring it down, you put it on the piles, finished. Yeah. So for me, you know, I mean, I can see how it's done. But, you know, I have to admit, there's a big team that makes sure it happens properly, legally, yeah. And it's not going to fail, yeah. You know. So I'm supported and backed up by groups of people, and I work with all the time, you know. I mean, they're all the big pieces that are beyond my scale, my physical scale, are all supported as teamwork. Yeah. And that has to be acknowledged.
I would like to dwell on all these, but time is moving on. I'd like to look at another piece now that clearly needed a big team, which I was lucky enough to see when it was opened in Liverpool in 2007, a place called Turning the Place Over.
Yep.
And I've got a little movie of that, which is probably the best way to see it, because
dominated YouTube for a while.
Yeah, well, this is off YouTube.
Oh, it is off YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay.
For reasons that you will see, still photos wouldn't do this justice. Pleaser, isn't it? I say that's a crowd pleaser. I mean, how the hell did you? Can you remember what your initial thought was when were you commissioned by Liverpool City of Culture or whatever to say make us a site-specific piece somewhere?
No, there's a very interesting story to this. What happened is that is a happy accident based on a previous work about 9 years before, and it's where I glued a spindle onto a bearing that turned a facade of a building in Stockton. And when I glued it, the spindle fell over. But in trying to bend it back and fiddling with it, that happy accident announced itself to me, and I thought, my God, that goes around and comes back on itself. So I immediately started a set of models, and 9 years later found Lewis Biggs in a bar one evening and said, next year you've got European Capital of Culture, you've got a lot of empty spaces, I've got an idea for you. And I presented the idea to him in a drunken slur. And I could see he was intrigued, and he said, I'll get back to you within the week. By the time I got home, he'd sent me the email saying, can you bring the models up? I knew I'd hooked him. And in that 9 years, I'd found either the money, but not the building, or the building and not the money. And I went up in 2006, and I spoke to Lewis. I presented my case. I took a couple of models, all of the drawings, and won over the Liverpool Biennale, and they said that they wanted that as their flagship piece for European Capital of Culture. That was presented to the European Capital of Culture. They accepted it. They threw the money at it. I think we did that on 160,000.
Wow.
Really cheap. I'm cheap, you know. My slogan, however, is we're not cheap, but we're slow.
Come and decorate my house.
Be careful what you wish for, it might come true.
We were then contracted to run for 3 years, for 1 year, throughout 2008. In fact, we finished in early 2007 and were asked to turn on mid-2007 as a flag-waving piece to announce Liverpool, and we ran throughout 2008. In fact, we turned off January last year. Yeah. We ran for 3 years.
Great.
And we can switch back on, but we need someone to fund it. Okay. But we've just been announced as the shortlist on the World Excellent list for public art. So we're one of 25, and we could win. So we'll see.
With something like that, presumably there's no certainty that it will work in the large scale, even if you've done your tests and stress tests in the small scale. Is there any way that, knowing for sure that it doesn't matter how big we take these tolerances and these relative values, it will always perform in this way?
Well, this is where the likes of Brian Thomas and companies like Price and Myers. I mean, like I say, I don't do these things. What I do is I am the artistic director. But what happens is there is a big team, and it's made up of mechanical engineers and structural engineers and fabricators. And we look at the issue, and I'm there with my democratic models in card and paper and toilet rolls and whatever, and we're all working and snipping and cutting. And then it goes to the computer, less democratic, but obviously designed up. And then it's all tested within the computer. I mean, we're very lucky in this age that you can do that kind of thing in the same way as you can put a jumbo in the air, that we can test it and say, yeah, that will run. Yeah. We know we can guarantee 15 years on the first motor, and then there's a maintenance call, blah, blah, blah. So we can actually put manuals out and say, this is what you need to do to have a piece like this per year. Yeah. And if the client is comfortable, they'll take it on.
Well, don't tell David Hockley that you don't cut the hole yourself. He'll be furious. You brought that up.
I know David.
I mean, an amazing piece, and obviously that gives you a little bit of a flavour of it. Coming up to date now, as I'm afraid we must, you recently were commissioned by the very expensive telephonic mobile phone and watch company, Virtu, were you not?
Virtu, yes.
What was that about, and what did that involve?
It was a slight step aside from what I normally do, but I'm known for actually taking on things which are the unusual. Yeah. And I thought, well, this is another string to my bow, I'll try it. And the president of Virtu phone company, luxury phones, asked me if I could make a sculpture for their company. And it would be the first of 5 commissions from around the world. And I agreed, but I didn't read the small print, which was you have to use their phone in some way. So what we did is we came up at the end of one year, we came up with a film, which took me back to my kind of musical roots of, like new ways of sound making. What I did is I built a false floor of about 40 feet with drum heads planted in it, and had a line of phone parts that were dropped and was filmed by a whole team and produced this percussive moment of their phone not ringing but producing sound by hitting the drum's heads and bouncing. So you'd have splashes of nuts and bolts, you'd have gold sections of phone body parts dropping on the head and bouncing off. And we just caught this cacophony of chaos, which went from a tense state to a relaxed state. And added to that, we then scooped up everything and built a little Virtu city, like an architectural model. So it became a kind of landscape of communication. And it was, we were successful with it, and they were very pleased with it, and it's been to Shanghai, we're taking it to Hong Kong and Moscow, and it's one of those little sideline things that one does. A lot of artists will not touch that area, but, I've spent my life dabbling in the cracks that artists won't go, to actually push myself forward, and rather than sort of confirm commonality about ideas, it's to say, well, I'm not sure about this. I want to go underneath and dig underneath and find out about something. So that was one of those projects that took me there.
Yeah. And now to bring us back up to date, as in this year of the Olympics, a project that you're doing at the Delaware Pavilion in Bexhill, which is a fascinating piece. We've only got a couple of your photographs that you've sent us on of the maquettes, because you've not started. Could you just give us a bit of a background to this?
Again, I keep talking about my friends as the late. It is the late Alan Hayden. I mean, all my dead friends. The late Alan Hayden, who unfortunately died last year, the director of the Delaware Pavilion, has been hunting me for several years for a piece of work. And he did a rooftop show with Anthony Gormley several years ago, where Anthony placed some figures on the roof and the public could go up and wander amongst them. And it wasn't that this was to be an annual thing, but he approached me and said, would I think about a rooftop sculpture as part of the regional Cultural Olympiad bid? And you know, I went up there and started formally looking at, you know, the edge where the land meets the sea meets the sky, the edges of the building rather than the form of the building. So I was kind of toying with that. But I'd also come away from a series of works over a couple of years that looked at film and sculpture. I mean, film's very good. Sculpture's very good at dealing with mass, but it's not very good at dealing with time. So if I could put film in with the sculpture, time and mass work together. So I was making pieces, you know, where the two worked. Like the third two piece, I suppose. And I started to think about, you know, the formal aspects of edges, and I started thinking about my previous investigations in film, and I started thinking about the De La Ware Pavilion. And I also started to bring up this thing like with the slice, you know, the context of a situation, and Bexhill-on-Sea. And it just dawned on me, what I need to do is a cinematic moment experienced on the roof. And the piece is called Hang On a Minute, Lads, I've Got a Great Idea. And it's the final sequence from The Italian Job, and we're resurrecting the coach that will sit on the roof and rock throughout the Summer Olympiad. 36 feet long, 8 feet 2 inches high and wide. Why does someone do that? Right next to that is an empty flagpole. I've never seen a flagpole. I've never seen a flag on that flagpole down at De La Ware. It's a red, white and blue coach. I'm flying the flag for the UK, in one sense. The other thing is, we're not putting gold bullion in there. But given our scenario...
You are referencing The Italian Job.
Yeah, we are referencing. But given our current financial scenario, I just think a comment about where we are financially while we're spending and enjoying ourselves is quite a nice idea as well. So whether the press will write about that, that's where the idea is from. Yeah, that's fantastic. The context. We open very late June this year.
Fantastic.
Till October.
Time sadly is running out. If anyone has a question, or maybe we can take two for Richard before we lose him. It's been an absolutely fascinating talk, and there's so much more I'd like to ask him, but let me throw it open to the floor. Any questions about Richard or his work or his process or his plans?
Said it all.
Gentleman back.
What's the current dream project?
What's the current dream project?
The current 3 projects. Did I say that?
Dream project.
The current dream project.
That gives him an idea.
That's my starting point. Well, actually, there's a couple of dream projects. I say dream in inverted brackets because they're nightmares at the same time. We're working on 100 metres for the new Terminal 2 at British Airways, BAA, sorry. And we're currently caught in contractual problems and obligations, but that will be ready in 2014. I'm working with a project in Dunkirk, which is actually an organisation called Frac Calais, but they've now got new space in Dunkirk, which is the old shipyard in Dunkirk, and they have a project space and a new space, which is a copy of the project space. The new space is built in plastic. It'll hold the bibliothèque, the offices, their collection, etc. The project space is the old shipyard, it's the old hangar, and it's a turbine hall space. And I've got to open that, and we've got an idea, which is on wraps at the moment, but that also. And there's 3 or 4 others. I mean, I could say another one.
You don't have to. One last question before... Yes?
What about that one you did at the Serpentine Curve Gallery with the taxi, with the deconstruction?
Oh, the Barbican.
Oh, the Barbican, yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, just to explain it, that actually references when I was getting involved with film and sculpture. The taxi piece, to explain, is that most people take a journey in a taxi from A to B. What I decided to do was make a film about a process which is taking a journey in a taxi, i.e. cutting in at the front and going right the way through the taxi and coming out the back over a period of 3 days. So I got a whole load of hydraulic cutting equipment and went in at the front with all my umbilical cord and tools, and I had a team for 3 days film me. A series of grunts and whatever. The worst moment of that is arriving every morning and having to carry on, but covering yourself in oil, because I went through the engine first. So you had to, you know, having had a shower, arrived at the studio, I had to kind of, you know, black up, as it were, and then get in, so...
Oh, fantastic. I mean, I think we're going to have to leave it there. It's been an absolute joy this evening to have three amazing, original and courageous artists. Alison Jackson. Yay. Gary Kemp. Yay. And Richard Wilson, R.A. Thank you so much.